All right, so today we're going deep on cardamom.
Cardamom.
You know, that spice that's
Whoa.
probably in your kitchen somewhere taking up space.
Yeah.
But we're not just talking about, like its flavor profile or anything.
Yeah.
Today it's all about the potential health benefits.
The science.
The science, yeah.
Yeah.
And we've got a whole bunch of meta-analyses to dig into.
Meta-analyses.
Which basically means they've combined data from tons of studies to give us a clearer picture than any single study could on its own.
Absolutely.
So we're talking, what does the research really say about how cardamom could impact your heart?
Heart health.
Yeah, and your metabolism.
Metabolism, like huge topic these days.
It is a huge topic. Yeah.
It really is.
So let's dive into that heart health piece first.
Okay.
There's a 2024 meta-analysis from Nutrition Research that I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
They looked at how cardamom affects things like your cholesterol,
Right.
triglyceride, inflammation, even oxidative stress.
Oxidative stress, a lot of people don't even think about that.
No, they don't. But it all matters for your heart.
It all plays a role.
And the scale of this meta-analysis was really impressive. I mean, they pulled data from almost 1,000 participants
Wow.
across 12 different trials. So that's a pretty solid foundation to start drawing some conclusions from.
Yeah, and they did find some really encouraging associations between cardamom consumption and certain markers.
Oh, like what?
Well, specifically, they found that people who consumed cardamom tended to have lower total cholesterol.
Interesting.
On average, the reduction was about 8.5 milligrams per deciliter.
So that's not a small change.
Not insignificant, no.
If you're watching your cholesterol, that's got to be good news.
Right.
Now, I think I remember reading something about triglycerides, too.
You're right. They also look at triglycerides, and they found a reduction there as well.
Okay.
Just over 14 milligrams per deciliter on average.
Okay, so if someone's doctor has, told them to keep an eye on their triglycerides, this could be pretty relevant for them.
Absolutely. It's definitely a finding that keeps popping up in the research.
Okay, so we've got cholesterol, we've got triglycerides.
Mhm.
Now, this study also looked at inflammation, which, as we all know, is kind of a silent threat when it comes to heart health.
Right. It's a huge factor.
What did they see there?
They found some really interesting results. Actually, the study showed that cardamom consumption was associated with lower levels of high-sensitivity C-reactive protein.
HSCRP.
HSCRP, exactly.
Now, just for our listeners who maybe aren't familiar with that one,
Yeah.
HSCRP, it's a marker that doctors use to measure inflammation in the body.
It's a really common one.
Yeah, and they saw a decrease of a little over 1 nanogram per milliliter.
That's right.
Okay, and they also found a reduction in another inflammatory marker.
They did interleukin-6, or IL-6.
IL-6.
Which went down by an average of 1.81 picograms per milliliter.
Okay, so it's almost like cardamom is helping to calm things down in the body a bit.
Right. It's like it's dialing down some of that inflammation that can lead to heart problems.
But like with anything, it's not a simple black and white picture.
Exactly.
I mean, were there things that this study didn't find significant changes in?
Absolutely. I mean, while these reductions in total cholesterol, triglycerides, and those inflammatory markers are really promising,
Yeah.
the study didn't find that cardamom had a significant impact on HDL cholesterol.
Which is the good cholesterol, right?
The good cholesterol, right?
Yeah.
Or LDL cholesterol.
The bad guy.
The bad guy.
Okay.
They also didn't see consistent effects on all of the markers they looked at for oxidative stress.
Okay, so it's not a magic bullet for every single aspect of cardiovascular health, but it's definitely showing some positive influence on some pretty key markers.
Right.
So let's shift gears a bit and talk about blood sugar and weight management. Those are obviously super connected to metabolic health. And there's a 2022 meta-analysis from Diabetes and Metabolic Syndrome, clinical research and reviews that took a deep dive into this.
Yeah, this one was really interesting.
Yeah, what did they find out?
Well, they look at data from 6 studies with over 400 participants total.
Okay.
And those studies looked at people taking daily cardamom supplements,
Okay.
usually around 3 grams,
Okay.
and for periods ranging from 8 weeks to 3 months.
So a decent amount of time.
Yeah, a good chunk of time.
Yeah. And what were the results?
When it came to things like body weight, BMI, and waist circumference, they didn't see any significant effects.
Okay, so it's not looking like cardamom is the next big weight loss miracle.
Right, not based on this evidence anyway.
What about blood sugar levels themselves?
So for fasting blood sugar and overall insulin levels, they didn't find a significant impact there either.
Okay.
But when they started looking at longer-term indicators of blood sugar control, things got a little more interesting.
Interesting. Okay, so you're talking about things like HOMA-IR and HbA1c. And for our listeners who might not be as familiar with those terms, can you just give us a quick rundown of what they mean?
Sure. So HOMA-IR is a measure of insulin resistance.
Okay.
Basically, a lower HOMA-IR score means your body is more sensitive to insulin, which is a good thing.
Yeah, it means your cells are using glucose more effectively.
Right. And this study found that cardamom might actually help improve that sensitivity over time.
Interesting.
And then with HbA1c, that gives us sort of an average picture of your blood sugar levels over the past few months.
Okay.
And they saw a significant reduction there, too. The average was 0.48%.
Which, might not sound like a lot, but even small reductions in HbA1c can be meaningful, especially for long-term blood sugar management.
Exactly.
So if someone is really focused on keeping their blood sugar in a healthy range, this suggests that cardamom could be a helpful tool in their arsenal.
Potentially, yeah.
Okay, so we've got this interesting dynamic where it's not necessarily dramatically lowering blood sugar in the moment, but it seems to be influencing these important longer-term markers.
That's what the research suggests.
Okay, so now we've been talking about cardamom kind of generally, but there are different types, right?
Yes, there are.
And I know there was a 2020 meta-analysis in Clinical Nutrition eSpen that specifically looked at green cardamom.
Green cardamom.
Is there a difference in what the research shows for different types?
Yeah, that's a really important point.
Okay.
So green cardamom is the most common variety that people use.
Okay.
And this particular analysis found that green cardamom significantly reduced triglyceride levels.
Okay, so that's lining up with what we saw in that 2024 study, too.
Exactly. And that consistency across different studies makes it seem more likely that cardamom is actually having a real effect on triglycerides.
It's always good to see those results replicated.
Right. It strengthens the evidence.
Now, I think this study also had kind of a surprising finding, didn't it?
It did. Yeah. In 3 smaller studies that were included in their analysis, they actually saw a significant increase in BMI associated with green cardamom intake.
That's unexpected.
Yeah, but it's important to remember that overall, when they looked at all the studies together, there was no significant effect of green cardamom on total cholesterol, LDL, HDL fasting, plasma glucose, or overall body weight.
Okay, so that BMI finding is definitely worth noting, but it seems like it needs further investigation with maybe larger, more robust trials.
Exactly.
It just goes to show that we have to be cautious about making sweeping generalizations based on limited data.
Right, and that different types or preparations of cardamom might have different effects.
Okay, so to dive a little deeper into this whole blood fat question, there's another 2020 meta-analysis, this one from Phytotherapy Research, that looks specifically at cardamom's impact on the lipid profile.
Lipid profile.
What did this study add to the picture?
So this one also found a significant reduction in serum triglycerides.
Okay.
The average decrease was over 20 milligrams per deciliter.
So again, supporting that potential benefit.
Yeah, seems like a consistent trend.
But did this study find any changes in cholesterol levels, like total cholesterol, LDL, HDL?
No, it didn't find any significant changes there.
Okay, so it seems like the effect on triglycerides is really the most consistent finding so far.
It does appear that way.
Now let's talk about a specific population for a moment, people with metabolic syndrome.
Okay.
There's a 2023 meta-analysis in Phytotherapy Research that looked at how green cardamom affected blood pressure and inflammation in this group.
Yeah, this is a really important area to consider.
Because metabolic syndrome, it's more than just one condition, right? It's a cluster of conditions.
It's like high blood pressure, high blood sugar, unhealthy cholesterol levels, too much belly fat.
Right. All those things together really increase your risk of serious health problems.
Like heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes.
Exactly.
So what did this meta-analysis find for people dealing with all of that?
They found that green cardamom significantly decreased diastolic blood pressure.
Diastolic blood pressure. Now, that's the bottom number in a blood pressure reading, right?
That's right, the lower number.
And the average reduction was about 0.91 millimeters of mercury.
Which, maybe doesn't sound huge, but
every bit counts.
Every bit counts, especially with blood pressure.
Absolutely.
Now, what about inflammation in this group? Did they find anything there?
They did. They saw significant reductions in both hsCRP and interleukin-6 levels.
Okay, so again, supporting what we saw in that 2024 study, but now specifically in people with metabolic syndrome.
Exactly.
However, I do remember that this study didn't find a significant effect on systolic blood pressure.
That's right, the top number.
Okay, so mixed results there.
Yeah.
But it does seem like green cardamom could offer some benefits for people managing metabolic syndrome, especially in terms of blood pressure and inflammation.
Potentially, yeah.
Okay, so now for a really broad overview. There's a 2024 systematic review from Diabetes and Metabolic Syndrome, Clinical Research and Reviews.
Yeah.
And this one looked at both clinical trials in humans and preclinical studies in animals.
Wow.
To understand how cardamom affects various diabetes-related complications.
So really comprehensive.
Yeah, a big picture view.
Yeah.
What were the main takeaways from all of those studies?
Well, overall, the review concluded that cardamom shows beneficial effects on insulin resistance.
Okay, so that's in line with what we saw in that 2022 meta-analysis.
Right.
Okay.
It also pointed to positive impacts on oxidative stress and inflammation.
Okay. Again, consistent themes.
Right.
Yeah.
And the review also found improvements in dyslipidemia, which is basically unhealthy levels of lipids in the blood.
Okay.
Although it didn't find a significant impact on weight loss.
Interesting.
Yeah. And one more thing that they highlighted was that cardamom seemed to boost the activity of the body's natural antioxidant enzymes.
Okay.
And help decrease those harmful inflammatory factors.
So it's almost like it's working on multiple levels.
Right.
It's not just addressing one specific thing, but it's kind of supporting the body's own natural processes.
Exactly.
So this review really suggests that cardamom could have benefits beyond just blood sugar control.
Yeah, it could potentially help with various complications related to diabetes.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
A lot of different studies, a lot of different findings, but I think it's really important to be clear about what the science doesn't consistently show.
Right.
We don't want to overhype anything.
Absolutely.
So what are the areas where cardamom's effects weren't significant or consistent across the studies we looked at?
So like we mentioned, the effects on HDL and LDL cholesterol, those weren't consistently significant.
Okay.
And most studies didn't find significant changes in body weight or BMI.
Okay.
With that one exception of the increased BMI in some of the green cardamom studies.
Right. Yeah, we talked about that.
Fasting blood sugar and overall insulin levels also generally weren't significantly affected.
Okay.
Although we did see that one study suggesting potential long-term improvements in OBIR and HbA1c.
Right.
And finally, systolic blood pressure didn't consistently show a significant reduction.
Okay, so it seems like while there are definitely some promising signals coming out of this research, more work needs to be done to really confirm these findings and to figure out, the best dosages and how long people need to take cardamom for to see specific benefits.
Absolutely. And a lot of the studies themselves actually mentioned the need for larger, more rigorous clinical trials.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
That's really important because meta-analyses are great, but they're only as good as the individual studies that they're based on.
Right.
So we really need more high-quality research to solidify these initial findings.
So let's try to summarize everything we've learned after this deep dive into cardamom.
Deep dive.
It seems like there's some pretty encouraging evidence suggesting that it might help lower triglyceride levels and certain markers of inflammation.
Right.
There are also some signs that it could be beneficial for longer-term blood sugar control, insulin resistance, and diastolic blood pressure.
Especially with green cardamom.
Especially with green cardamom.
Yeah. And people with metabolic syndrome.
Right. But it's super important to remember that the effects on things like LDL and HDL cholesterol, body weight, fasting, glucose, those aren't as clear or haven't been shown to be significant in most of the research that we've discussed.
No, cardamom is not a cure-all. It's not a replacement for other healthy habits.
Definitely not.
But it could be a valuable part of a holistic approach to health.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
So for you listening out there, we've given you a lot to consider today. But we want to leave you with a question.
Okay.
How could you incorporate a little bit more cardamom into your life? Maybe in your cooking, in your tea.
Yeah.
Get creative.
Be creative.
It could be a small change, but it could have a big impact on your health.
Potentially.
And what other questions does this raise for you about the power of everyday spices? I mean, I often overlook these things that are right in our kitchens.
You do.
But they could be doing so much more for us than we realize.
Food for thought.
Food for thought, yeah. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time.
See you then.